So I'm kind of used to teaching workshops in that context, but I'm really excited to be here. I contacted Daisy maybe about a month ago and asked her if she had any room for me to do something over here, and she was gracious enough to let me join in. But this is new for me, so I wonder if maybe, I don't know, maybe Daisy is the spokesperson. I'm really curious about who you guys are. Can you kind of like tell me where you're coming from just real quickly, like around the room? In Durham? Or well, like what school you're in, or whatever, what brought you here? Nice. Yeah. Caroline. Nice. Yeah. Great.
So I'm being a little bit of a teacher in other ways in my community. I've decided to, well, I've been doing my web stuff and graphic stuff for a while.
Yeah.
So just want to learn how to teach kids.
Great. Great. Yeah. All right.
My name is John. I got my IT stuff. Every time I have like some experience, but
yeah. Right.
My name is Richard. I work at a appreciate the financial group. I want to learn more code, just to move up in the tech industry.
Yeah, great. Oh, good. Nice. Yeah. Okay.
My name is Nick. We're in Long City, New York. I go to exact birthday. I'm a senior in class and network security now. And of course, that's
Nice.
pretty much it.
Yeah.
My name is Matt. I'm a data scientist. I'm all that nonprofit called the Prep Institute.
Yeah.
And I'm TA.
Oh, thanks for helping out. That's great. I appreciate you guys sort of telling me who you are. Since this is new for me, I'm just wondering, do you guys feel like you know each other? Like enough to kind of bump somebody's elbow and go, hey, what did he just say? I mean, I'm serious when I ask that, because if you don't, take a minute to say hello to like your table mate. Just tell them who you are, because it helps me. Cool. I appreciate you doing that. I've found that particularly with Git, some of the stuff is very procedural, and if I go a little too fast, it's not intentional. But I want you guys to feel free to raise your hand, slow me down, ask me to speak louder, or just bump your table mate and say, hey, what did he just say? Or I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but the volunteer TA in the back probably help out. So don't feel like you are disrupting if you don't stay at pace, or if you somehow get past. Let's just go, we'll do this together. That's the goal. My understanding is that y'all are basically in like a JavaScript web development class. Is that right? And so that's interesting. I have never coded in JavaScript, but back in 1995, I was a web developer for about 10 years. And that was so long ago that some of the technologies are like completely different. Like we were barely getting into cascading style sheets. Have you gotten into that kind of stuff?
They're doing that in another class.
Yeah, yeah.
Started learning.
But anyway, so I may be am slightly out of context as well. And so if I say something that doesn't make sense, please let me know, and I'll be happy to try and figure out a different way to say it. So what Daisy and I, did we wait long enough? We were sort of trying to let people trickle in.
I mean, you can get started. I think we have a couple more that we started.
And we can wait longer.
We can get going.
Yeah, okay. So the thing that Daisy and I had decided to work out was that we would do a GitHub and Git workshop. So that translates loosely to GitHub for social coding and Git for version control. And we're going to talk about what those things mean, and then hopefully hands on the keyboard, start using them. It's really important to understand, at least on the outset, that Git and GitHub are not the same thing, right? And so we're going to start to define these things. But earlier, I had brought up this website. This is an example of a GitHub website, and all it is a contained repository of a bunch of code that I wrote. It has a collaborative feature to it, so I could have written it with other people, but it's just stuff that I wrote today. And it makes it very easy to share that code with others. It makes it very easy for other people to look like. A lot of people who are working in GitHub environment are doing open source coding. So the value of that open source coding is generally the idea that there's wisdom in a crowd, and you might see a coding error that I didn't see. And so in a GitHub environment, you can pull my code down, you could fix it, and then you could push up what's called a pull request and let me see what you potentially fixed, and then I get to decide if I want to incorporate that into my code or not. So you could either be intentional part of my group, like we could have an agreement where we were part of a collaborative group, and your code and my code just consisted side by side, and we could both code over top of each other, and we would trust each other in a case like that. Or in a GitHub environment, it can be completely public, and like I might not know you at all. You might have just been looking through my code and said, oh, I really like this stuff, this is great, and it would be even better if you did this. You could push it back to me, or you could, there's a thing called forking, which means that you pull the code, because it's, in my case, it's open source, and then you can take it in a completely different direction. So you don't have to push it back to me. So there's all of these open source concepts. But the general idea behind GitHub is, as a social coding site, is a place to sort of profile your work. Sharing is important, but also just sort of presenting it. So they call it social coding because it's kind of like Facebook for coding. Now, I don't use Facebook anymore, and I'm sort of slowly getting out of those kind of social networks. But you know, what do you use Facebook for? Anybody? What do you do? You socializing, saying stuff you did. Yeah, got a problem. You can do all that stuff in GitHub. You just wouldn't do it with your social stuff, right? It would be about your code. The other thing that's nice about GitHub, if you look at, I'm gonna go to the main profile page so you can see what GitHub looks like. You can see how this looks. It mocks a social coding site, right? So it's got followers and following, and these for repositories. One of these, we're going to all make a repository today. That's an individual folder where we're going to put all of our work. Then we can choose to share it or not. People can look at other people's coding sites and see what kind of work they're doing, right? Or see how often this little graphic right here tells people how often I've been submitting code into my own repositories or into other repositories. So that's the idea behind social coding is, A, it's a good place to profile your work, B, it's a good place to share or collaborate with others. And it happens to work really well with this thing called Git, which is for version control. So how many folks here have heard of the Linux operating system? Yeah, that's kind of what I figured for most of you. So there are different programs for version control. The one we're going to use, is, like I've already said, is called Git. There's others that you may have heard of. One's called Mercurial, another one's called SVN. I've not used those. I don't know how they compare, but just so you know, there are these other tools. But Git was designed by the same guy who designed, or was sort of the main lead developer of Linux. And he refers to it as a stupid content tracker. That's what Git is, right? So the idea is that you maybe write a bunch of code and you do this thing called a commit, which is you timestamp some changes that you made. So if I make a opening hello world page and I put in the first line, my name is John, and then I commit that, that's one version of the file. I go back to that file and I add, like my favorite movies are, and I put Spider-Man and who knows what else, 2 other movies, and then I commit that. Now I've got 2 commits or 2 timestamps, and the advantage of that is if I decide that I make a mistake, I can actually roll back to the earlier version without trying to go into the file and sort of piecemeal take out all the stuff that I just changed. So rolling back is a really nice piece of Git. But the important thing that I was trying to get to with that Git is designed by this guy who is like the main developer of Linux, is Linux is a worldwide open source project, right? So Git is bulletproof. It enables collaboration, and it manages conflicts, and it enables you to merge things in a big collaborative context. People that I work with at Duke are mostly using it to manage their own personal profiles, but it has all of those other conflict management collaboration features. This guy in the back who is employed as a data scientist, or maybe Jared as well, are probably more high-powered coders, and they probably use Git, I'm assuming use Git more often. You can use it in a lot of different contexts. I tell people you don't have to check in code only with Git. You can check in anything. You can check in images, you can check in data files, you can check in, just in PDF files, an enormous amount of stuff. So it's really good for managing a code base or a project. All right, so it's just the takeaway there is that Git and GitHub are not the same thing, but they work really, really well together. I think we talked about all of that stuff. The other thing that is on this slide that's probably worth mentioning is that if you imagine you have this code project that you've completed and get it just right, and then you have this brainstorm that you want to change it, right? But maybe you have a deadline where you have to turn that code in. How confident are you that you can start changing what you need to turn in say, an hour, right? You get what I'm getting at. You might have a little bit of tenets of sort of anxiety about tweaking what's already working. The nice thing about this Git system, this version control system, is you can do what's called branching. So I can have this main, often what's called the production version of my code, and then I can create a branch, which is with just the stroke of one command line. I can create a branch that is a complete copy of my working code, and I can do all kinds of tweaks on that. I could screw it up. I could make it better. If I make it better and I like it, I can check back into the main branch and I can merge it all back in with another single command line. If I break it, my production version of my code stays the same. Never had to do anything with it. So that's another context or use case behind how people use version control. I think we pretty much talked about all this, but the other thing that's worth noting about version control, the way it's designed, you can run version control Git on your local laptops. In this case, we're using C9, and C9 is like a Ubuntu cloud version, right? So there's a Git version running up there as well. But if you think about your local laptop, a Git repository is the same thing as a local folder. You have to do something to initialize that local folder. But that folder on your laptop can be a Git repository. Whether or not it's up in GitHub or not, it can be a Git repository and fully managed version control, which means you can roll back or you can do whatever you want to that you can do in version control. One other thing that probably is worth mentioning is that if you have really large files, there is a system for that. I tend to not work that way, but that system is called Git Large File Storage, or GLFS. That may not be a particularly important context for you right now, but I'm sure a lot of you have heard the phrase big data, and big data is a really ambiguous term, really relative. Like big data to some people could be a 5 megabyte file, and to other people it's a 3 terabyte file. But the way Git works, it becomes less efficient if the file becomes huge, and so they have an alternative way to manage really large files. And then there's that other thing on there called forking. That's that aspect that I mentioned earlier, where if I had some code base up on GitHub and you wanted to see if you can improve it, you're technically going to fork that code, right? That creates its own separate copy that only you control at that point. Even though I put it up there to share, you can manipulate my code in your own context. That has no effect on my code until you decide to change it and push it back to me. So that's where the term forking comes in. So this is basically what Git looks like, right? Now this picture actually kind of works with GitHub, because what happens is this is your local file system, or in our context here tonight, this is going to be C9. And this is going to be the remote system, so that's going to be the cloud repository base, so that's going to be GitHub, right? And so what happens is on your local file system, or in C9, you're writing all your code and you're staging changes and commit those changes into the timestamp. And then anytime you commit them, you're going to want to push them up to the remote system. And so here's one way that works for me. I don't know if this use case will work for you or not, but I tend to work on one machine at work, and I'll make a bunch of changes. And then maybe I'm coding or writing documents all day long, and it gets up to about 5 o'clock, and I'm gonna make sure that the last thing I do is commit and push it up to GitHub, and then go home. Maybe I'm gonna walk the dog, eat some dinner, whatever, just doing my thing. And maybe in the process of all that, I realize that I made a huge mistake, and I need to kind of go back to maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's where the rollback feature comes in. But the other thing is, I'm now at home. I'm not on my work computer anymore. Now, some people carry one computer everywhere they go. I have a desktop computer at work. I have a laptop at home, and they're really for different purposes. But what I can do once I put that code up in GitHub is I can go to my home computer, and it also is running Git, and I can pull that whole code base down exactly as I left it at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And then either I can keep on coding, or like I said, if I realize I made a mistake, I can roll back, make some changes, fix whatever I want to fix, and then I can stage that, commit that, and then once again push, and it goes back up to GitHub. So this is why Git and GitHub work really, really well together. So yeah, you have to, I'm actually going to try and show you a simpler way to roll back, but the specific way to roll back, every time you do a commit, Git assigns what's called a hash, which is a code of that timestamp. And it's something that's not easy to read. It'd be like 5C384, whatever. But it's going to be like 26 characters long. Technically, you only need like the first 5. So if you wanted to roll back to a specific commit, you just need to know that hash. And you say revert to this. I think there's an easier way to do it, but yes, that is exactly how it works. Did that answer your question? Okay. Right, so then I'm back at home, I make my changes, I do my commit, and I push back up to GitHub. But then my work computer is out of sync with all the work that I did at home, right? So in order to keep that in sync, I'm going to go back to work, and the very first thing I'm going to do when I walk in the morning is I'm going to do a pull. And that's going to pull from that central cloud repository. So that means for me, because I'm mostly doing this as a solo coder, my code is always up to date, but it's also one advantage is I've always got a copy somewhere. But those copies have all of the timestamps. If you're working in a collaborative environment, it's a little bit more complex than that because different people can be pushing and committing. And you sometimes have to deal with the merge, with the conflicts. But, so that's a question for you guys. How many, in this class, do you do collaborative coding? Or is it mostly solo projects? Mostly solo?
Still a lot of solo stuff so far.
That's good.
Very small,
Yeah.
starting stuff.
I mean, the easiest way to start to learn about Git is to use it as a solo person to just start to put your folders under version control. So collaboration is important. It's important to know that you can do it, but I don't know that we'll necessarily learn all of that today. Learn all of the rollback and whatnot. Yes.
A question about collaborative working on Git. So if two people are working, they're both working on the same file, and somebody commits after doing their part. The other person has to basically wait for that person to commit in order to work on their code, right? There is no real time.
Well, if you need to, so if I push up, if I'm working on a change, version 1.1, like version 1 is the stable version that's always out there. And now I'm working on version 1.1, and you want to also add to version 1.1 the stuff that I'm working on, you need to wait until I commit. But you could be working at the same time as me. Maybe we both had this idea at the same time, and we both take the initiative when we decide to fix it. And maybe we didn't fix it the same way, but we did fix the problem. When we push that up, then we have a conflict that we have to resolve. But Git will enable us to resolve it. So it's not real time, but none of it breaks the working production code.
Yeah, but Git doesn't add two codes together.
Correct.
Well, I'll say it won't. You'll have a problem if your code is in the same place, but Git is a very smart tool. So let's say you've got a large file, it's 100 lines of code, and one function's up here, another function's down here in the file. You change this function, somebody else changes this one, and they push their changes up, then you can probably merge their stuff right into yours without having any problems. You don't have to wait for anything else. If you're not literally touching the same lines, it's usually smart enough to know how to put those two together without having problems.
And it will also tell you where the changes in the file are, right? So that's a really, you can eyeball it generally if there is a conflict and go, oh, well, I wasn't touching that part of the code, right? Or whatever.
And if it does have a conflict, it's not going to do something that fixes the conflict, and it will help. They're like literally working, like you said. You'll see, like, here's everything that I think is a conflict. You have to fix it.
Okay, so it just allows you to commit there's a conflict.
Not directly. You have to do something to fix it. But,
It won't fix it for you.
yeah.
which is why I think Linus Torvalds calls it a stupid content tracker, right? It's sort of another way to say it is it doesn't do anything smart with your files. Like you can have confidence that it's not applying some algorithm that you don't understand.
Yes, it doesn't add anything, but it applies to something.
Right. All right. There's a bunch of project management features that are built into GitHub, but what I'd rather do than talk about those right now is I'm just going to mention one thing is that there are other tools like GitHub, right? Git is the version control. GitHub is a social coding site. It's the big one, kind of like Facebook is the big one. But you may have heard of GitLab, or you may have heard of Bitbucket. They're all sort of the same kind of thing. Social hub for collaborative coding and version control. And so I think and I would also like to point out, we're not going to use these today, but there's some, Git is primarily a command line program. It is a program, but it operates like barely above the operating system, at least in my mind. So it works. It was developed initially as a command line option. We're going to learn the command line option because that's what seems to work well with C9. But there are some clients, some of which you can pay for, some of which are free. This one's free. That can make all of this merging and collaboration and branching a little bit easier to deal with because it makes it all a little more visual. We probably won't get that far, but I want you to be aware that those things do exist. So main goal for today is to clone a GitHub repository. We're going to clone something that I developed earlier today. Then you're going to develop your own GitHub repo, pull it down, add some stuff, make some commits, and push it back up. So let's kind of jump right in. What I would like you to do, I think Daisy and I were talking about this, and she had asked everybody to make a GitHub account. So if you haven't done that, now's a good time to maybe work with the TA and see if you can get that done. So what I would ask you to do is go ahead and log into your GitHub account and go ahead and log into your C9 account. Maybe if you just have them as the same, two different tabs, then let's just take a minute and then I'll catch right back up with you. Oh, and I will also mention that this is the part where GitHub is a little bit like Facebook, like you can kind of do your own little social thing, but I would not recommend that you put like horrible pictures like that. Like if you're looking for coding jobs, you might want to, you know, button it down a little bit.
Easily, is this information like, if I would like to do it,
I'm sorry, can you also hear me what? Oh, I haven't used Visual Studio, so I don't know all the implications, but
is it drastically different?
So, I don't know, I don't even know how to answer that question. My answer would be probably not, but I've literally never even seen Visual Studio. So my imagination of how Visual Studio works is it's a client on your laptop, and whereas C9 is a cloud software, right? So anything that we can get, commit, push, and pull from C9, you can use those same commands on your laptop, but you have to install Git on your laptop first, right? And then it'll work. I mean, it's the same concept, but you have to be aware of where the repository, where the local repository originates. All right, so just to recap, we're log into your GitHub, log into your C9, and what I want you to do, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to clone a single GitHub repository, one that I developed earlier today. So if you can see this URL, maybe the third tab, what I want you to do is open up this particular repository that I created. And I'm going to say it out loud in case you can't see it. https://is.gd. And then it's git for CTD, and the 4 is a number. So git for CTD. Oh, thank you. Right. So then this is a particular GitHub repository, and what it consists of. If you look at this, it tells you there's some space up here that I added a brief description. It allowed me to add a URL to something else, so that's a URL to the slides we were just looking at. It allows me to put some tags in here. So I made a tag today called Code the Dream, and then I clicked on it to see if anybody else had used that tag. Turns out right now I'm the only one. So if you use Code the Dream, then there'll be a whole collection of repositories that hover over that one tag. Then below that, it tells me that I have 16 commits. So there's 16 different versions of this repository that I started today. Only one branch, so that's going to be the main branch. It's often called the master branch. Only one contributor, that's me. Gives me room to list a license here, and we're going to do that in a second. The license I use, because this is, what I put up here is technically not software, right? It's just a bunch of markdown files, so it's really educational material. So I used a license that's called Creative Commons. But if you are doing software, you're probably going to use a different license. The one that most people, as far as I know, and some of these coders may have something different to say about it. As far as I know, most people who are doing open source software are generally using MIT license, but there are a few others. There's even a website where you can kind of decide what license you want to apply. And of course, you don't have to make them open source if you don't want to. Right, and then what we see is a bunch of the files that I was composing today. So one directory where my slides are, a whole bunch of little files that make Git work, like Git attributes and Git ignore, which we're going to ignore that for the moment. There's my license file again. By default, GitHub will display the README file. So that readme.md, which stands for Markdown, is what's displayed right here. Okay, so you can make a Markdown file. Now the nice thing is that if you click on this little green button, you'll get a flyout message right there, a context box. You can actually download this code to your local machine right now. Okay, all you have to do is click download zip and you'll have a zipped compressed file of all the code. But that's not really what we want to do. What we don't want to do is we want to get it over to C9. So what you're going to do is soon, actually I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, soon we're going to grab this URL. But now that you've seen GitHub, let's go back over to code 9. And what I want you to do is create a new workspace. And if you'll do this with me slowly so that we don't lose anybody and don't get ahead of ourselves, you should see something like this. I'm hoping this is familiar to you on code 9. I have never used code 9 before yesterday. So if I'm not using it the way you're used to, you're gonna have to kind of school me a little bit, which I'm open to. So what we're gonna do is give our project workspace a name. Let's say clone C-L-O-N-E, cloned C-L-O-N-E-D dash Git dash workshop. And then over in the description, you can write anything you want, like Wednesday, May 2nd, workshop, code the dream workshop, doesn't matter. Version control workshop. I'm going to leave mine public. I don't know much about whether or not, does C9 have a limit on how many private workspaces you can have?
Yeah, I mean, they're deprecating all this stuff through C anyway.
Yeah, I noticed that.
But I think people are allowing one private workspace unless they pay.
So you probably want to leave it public. All right, so then the last thing we're going to do to create this workspace is we're going to put the GitHub repo URL in this text box right here. So stick with me here, go over to that GitHub page that we had just opened. Again, with the green clone or download box. Oh, wait, sorry, I'm still getting ahead of myself. This is partly because I'm so unused to C9. All right, we might have to do some of this again. What I want you to do, let's go back to the dashboard. How do I get to the dashboard? Not that, oh, that way. Click on the gear for account settings and click on connected services. I will admit that I'm not 100% certain this is absolutely necessary, but the one thing about Git is, at least for me, I found that the initial install is a little sensitive to variation, but after you get it working, you never really have to touch it again. So I'm just going to suggest you do it the same way I did it. So click on the connected services. You'll see that there are some different. Yes. How far back should I go? So let's go back to the main dashboard. I think that's it. Is that the dashboard? And then click on the gear where it says account settings. And when you get there, click on connected services. Okay. And then from connected services, click on GitHub. I already have a blue button there, but what I want you to do, you should have a green button. Go ahead and click connect. And I believe if somebody hasn't done this already, correct me if I'm wrong, will it not prompt you for your GitHub ID? So go ahead and log in with your GitHub ID right there. All right. Now we're going to have to do a few things again. Let me just make sure, this is important that we don't get too out of sorts here, so I don't want to go too fast. No, it's all good. Extension course. No, it's fine.
Now I'm going to break all the rules.
Yeah, right.
It's going to plug this one right into the other.
Okay.
Nothing will go back to that.
Not as long as we're all here. All right. One day we'll have wireless power, right? One day. All right, so I'm not going to click on this disconnect, but I think if you can, you should be able to still click on this create new workspace button. And that should take us back to where we were before. And so I want folks to be there. If you're not there, now's a good time for TAs to kind of make sure everybody's up to speed. So we're going to create, once again, I'm going to create this, I'm going to do this again. My workspace name, I'm going to put in, you can literally put in whatever speaks to you, but there are some rules about how you can name it, like no spaces, no uppercase. Cloned, version, that's not what I wrote before, but it doesn't matter. Version control workshop. And then over here, May 2nd, code the dream, version control workshop. And then down here, this is where I need to go get this URL, right? So back over to the GitHub repository that we opened from that URL on the bottom of that board. Scroll down until you see this green button. And when you see that green button, click on it one time. And I need you to hover over this option that says use HTTPS. If you don't have use HTTPS, if yours says use SSH, leave it like it is. If you have use HTTPS, click on it. Oh, wait, hold on. Hold on. Nope, I lied. If you have use HTTPS, leave it as it toggles back and forth. So all we need to make sure we do is click on use SSH until we have this right URL. So you'll know you're in the right spot if it says clone with SSH, right? You'll notice as I toggle back and forth, this little header changes back and forth. It needs to say clone with SSH. Okay, so this is one of those things, by the way, when you're asking about will it work with Visual Studio, whether or not you configure your Git with SSH keys or not will have an effect, and it's a little bit more of a pain to configure with SSH keys. As far as I understand, it's also more secure. So depends on what you want to do.
For now, if you want, you can just use HTTPS just what it will do is whenever you try to connect to the connection, it will ask you to put in like your Git password or our GitHub. Right now, I'm doing it all on online, but I'm just kind of taking notes.
Yeah.
Either one works. SSH is a little bit of a pain to get set up.
Yeah.
But HTTPS is pretty much works out of the box. You have to do almost nothing, but you have to correctly retain every time you do anything. So.
Right. Okay, so if you have clone with SSH up here, then all you need to do is click on this little clipboard right here, which will copy the SSH GitHub repository URL that we want to paste over in Cloud9. All right, so I'm going to go over to Cloud9 again, and right here in this box where it says clone from Git or Mercurial URL, immediately below that, just paste in that GitHub URL that you just copied. Right, and if you get that far, and again, I've never used Cloud9 before, so I assume you can use any of these templates you want. If you have a favorite template, I use the first one because I'm not doing any complicated coding. So HTML5 worked just fine. I'm just going to click on the green button where it says Create Workspace. And then at that point, C9 will do its thing. Should take a minute. And when it finally does open up, what you will see in your Cloud9 workspace is all of the code from the repository that I created earlier today, right? So that's one example of how it's really easy to share your code base through GitHub. All right, so let's wait a little bit longer because there's probably some lag with wireless and everything. But what you should see is the README file displayed as a preview. You should see about 4 or 5 files right there that are all .md extensions. Well, one of them is a .txt. The .md stands for Markdown. Anybody here use Markdown tagging? So Markdown's a lot like HTML. HTML is markup, and technically Markdown is a markup language, but it's just very, very simplified. And it enables what you see here, like header size 1, or bolding, or URL anchor references.
Who's got their workspace stuff? Right, I guess so. Some are supporting.
So we close? Who's got it up now? Looks like everybody. Anybody does not? Okay, let's just wait a little while longer. Maybe Jared can, I don't know if you know anything about C9, he's having a problem with something coming up. All right, so for most of us, we have the whole repository loaded. And so what we just did there's a couple common commands, and I listed them lower in this README file. You can see them right here. And what we just did there is the functional equivalent of a git clone, right? So you remember that I said that sort of by default, Git is a command line language, not too dissimilar to what's happening at the Linux command line. And so if I were to do that in a different way, I would have typed git clone at the terminal, right? I don't know if you folks have used the terminal much, but down here, below here where it says bash, that's my command line terminal. So the rough equivalent, and if you type this, don't hit enter, would be git clone and then that same URL. And that would have pulled down the whole repository. Don't press enter. I don't know. Probably nothing. Yeah. Well, open up a new workspace and you can try it out. So what we're going to do now is, so you've just cloned a repository, and now you've got all of the slides and the handouts. You've got a cheat sheet of Git commands that we're going to use. But let's go back over to GitHub, and I want you to create your own repository at GitHub right now. So if you can get back to a screen like this, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a little plus mark. Mine's right there. It's between the little icon of me and the little notification bell. In between those, there's a little plus mark. So if I click on that one time, I'll get a context menu, and I'm going to click New Repository. Now, for me, this turns out to be the easiest way to create a new repository, is I'll open the repository first at GitHub, and then clone it to my workspace. You don't have to do it that way. With Git, you can do things a million different ways, but this I find to be the easiest. So I'm going to go ahead and click New Repository, and what I would like you to do is make effectively your first GitHub repository. So under GitHub repository name, just type in Hello World. I think you might have to put a, I don't think you can use spaces, so. Oh, maybe you can. I don't think, I'm surprised that it did that. Hello.
Yeah, I can change it to a dash. You can see it.
I don't see it.
It tells it terminal note underneath.
Oh, does it say it will do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Your new repository will create this other dash.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that. And then for a description, you can write my first GitHub repo. A lot of people call them repos. If you want to spell out repository, you can. If you're like me, I hate to spell. I'll sit there and wonder about it, so I'm just going to write repo. Yeah. Coder I used to know used to say the best code was stolen code. I don't think he really meant that, but you know, he also used to claim that he was really lazy and that's why he was coding, because he was always trying to save time, right? All right, so the other thing that you want to do is you want to check this checkbox right here where it says initialize this repo with a README file. All repositories, you don't have to have a README file, but a good sign of a well-crafted repository is going to have a README file. It's going to have a license. It's going to have some kind of brief description of what that repository is for, right? So we've got our brief description right here. We've got our README file. If you're a student, you could Google this later maybe. You can like Google GitHub student pack or something like that. If you can convince GitHub, and I don't think it's all that complicated, but if you can validate yourself as a student, then you can have unlimited private repositories. I cannot validate myself as a student, so for me, I can only have 3 private repositories, and I don't like to do that much stuff in private anyway. I don't work in a for-profit company, so those issues they don't pertain to me. So I just always make my repositories public. If you're not a student, I will just note to you that I talked about these other social coding sites, GitLab and Bitbucket. They don't care if you're a student or not. You can have as many private repositories there as you want. And those sites work very similarly to GitHub. So if that's an issue for you, we're not going to delve into that in any great detail, but just remember that you can make a lot of private repositories over there and it won't cost you any money. Okay, now this next Dropbox down here is specific to languages. I mentioned that I usually code in R. You don't need to do this. You can leave yours at none, but I just want you to see this. So if I was a C++ programmer, I could choose C++, and it will create this file that prevents Git from pushing sensitive files up into GitHub, right? I don't think JavaScript has that issue. If I had clicked R, it would change. It will change to grab a different. It will change to grab a different Git ignore file. The other thing that it had on that screen that I think you all are still looking at is the next box over. Says what? What? Add license. Choose the MIT license for now. And then when you're done with that, click create repository. Yeah. Again, so the licensing can be a really kind of big deal, but just as a really rough rule of thumb, if you're creating open source software that's free, it's easy enough to use the MIT license. If you're creating other kinds of publication material, not software, I tend to use licenses called Creative Commons, which are they're not in the pick list. You just have to grab the file. It's just a standard ASCII file. There's nothing special about it. So you can grab any license you want and call it license.txt, and it will apply to your repository. Enforcement of your license is a completely different issue, right? If you need to enforce your license, you probably need a lawyer. But most of this stuff is on your honor. All right, so you have now created your first repository, and what I want you to do is I want you to clone this repository into C9, just like we did before. So you're going to click on this green button, clone or download. You're going to make sure it says clone with SSH. You're going to copy that URL, go over to your Cloud9, go back to your desktop, which
Easiest way to get there is to go to Cloud9 and top left.
Right here, thank you.
And then go to your dashboard. It's like
Yep, go to your dashboard. Sure enough, I was looking for a word that started with D. All right, so we're going to create another new workspace, right? You can click on this plus right here in the middle, load it. This time you're going to do the same thing. Call your project Hello World. Oh, no capitals. My first GitHub repo at Cloud9. And then I'm going to paste this in, this URL from my buffer. And then I'm going to click Create Workspace. Did you figure out the... Oh, good. Good, good. That's what I find easiest. You can actually you can start at Cloud9, you should be able to. It's a different set of commands. But for me, it's just easier not to type the commands, right? So I always make my repo up at GitHub first, and then I clone it down, and then I start to do my work. If you create you somehow you created a workspace and then you needed to figure out a way to push it up there, I think probably the way I would do it is I would go ahead and so I have this C9 workspace that I like, and then I want to push it up. I'm going to have to get a series of commands to do that. And the easiest way to get that series of commands is actually to go back to GitHub and create a new repository without the README file and without the git ignore file, just an empty repository. And the next screen will be all the commands that you need. Kind of have to read closely. Yeah. It's like, I mean, it depends on the context, but it's usually like 3 to 4 commands that you type one after the other. And if you do it a lot, you'll memorize it. It won't be no big thing. But I do it less than once a week, and every time I do it, I'm like, oh. So this is the way that I found works for me. All right, so now you have your hello world down. Is anybody not along at this spot? I don't know what that's about. You know what that is? All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to make some changes. We're going to stage those changes, and then we're going to commit those changes, and then we're going to push them back up to GitHub. Okay? So in terms of changes, easiest thing to do is to just right-click on this README file and click Open. If you click Preview, it renders it slightly differently. So all I want you to do then is maybe hit a blank line, maybe get to line 5, and type. So now we're tagging our document in Markdown. And we're not going to get too deep into Markdown, but it's basically ASCII text. But if you type 2 hashtags and type favorite movies, and then hit 2 more blank lines, you'll be at line 7. You can create a bulleted list just by preceding your items with a dash, right? So at line 7, I just hit dash space, and I'm going to write down Spider-Man. I'm going to put 3 movies down. I just saw one on Friday, best of. While the rest of the world was watching the Avengers, I was watching something else. Enemies. I don't know how to spell enemies. Shazam. Okay, we'll do Shazam. All right. So just add 3 movies, whatever they are, and there may be, again, C9 is new to me, so I'm just going to slowly go up to the command line and do file save. Looks like you can do Control S. There may be a different way to do it. But once you save that file, if you want to see right now how it's rendered, you could go back over here to this other view of the README file, and you can see that it created a bold header 2 with a bulleted list, right? So I've modified my README file. The file that I have on my local file system at C9 is no longer the same as what's on GitHub. So what I want to do is I want to stage that change. Now, it's really convenient to write in this bash terminal window down here at the bottom. And so I encourage you to do that, but I want you to know that it's probably hard for you to see that because it's way down here. So I'm going to do it a little differently. You don't have to do it my way. I'm going to go to Windows, New Terminal, and that gives me a bash window up here. So this is the Ubuntu bash window. So what can I do? I can type git -- version just to make sure that I have a Git that's working. And I do. It tells me I'm on Git version 2.4.1.14.1. But here's the thing. I made that change to my README file, and I want to know, I mean, I could make as many changes and add as many files as I want. The whole point of Git is to track how my versions are changing. So I want to know right now what changed. I'm going to type git space status. Git space status, status. And when it tells me, conveniently, it shows something in red. Red means that I have a file that has changed. I haven't done anything with it yet. I haven't staged it. And at this point, I only have one file. It's called readme.md. That's the file that I just changed. If you had added a second file, you should see 2 files, right? If I want to stage that, I'm going to type git space add space. And the safest thing to do is to type out the file name, readme.md. You can imagine that if you were working with 8 or 9 or 10 file changes or more, you might want to look for a shortcut. And so I'm going to tell you the shortcut. But just remember, with great power comes great responsibility. So you need to be careful when you do this because you don't want to overwrite something. So git space add space period or dot, right? And what that will do is that will automatically add all of the changed files into the staging area. So if I type git status again, git space status, you'll see that my README file, it knew and it tracked that the file had changed, but now I've added it into the staging area. So the last thing I need to do, remember that we're working on this model right here. For staging area, basically all I've done is I've done git add. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a git commit. And that's going to force the timeline. That's going to say all the changes I just made, I'm going to give it a name, right? So I'm going to be back over here, git space commit. Now I need to use a space -m for message, okay? And then my message is going to go inside of double quotes. So I'm going to call this my first commit. You can call it anything you want. Something that's going to speak to you. Ideally, it's going to be brief, not long, but also informative. All right, so when you get done with that, then I'll get this. Let me see if I can bring that up higher. I'll get some funky little message right there. It says master, and then it gives me that hash. So I think it's John mentioned to me that he was wondering how you roll back to a certain commit. This is an example of that commit hash that you would need to know. We're going to see how you can do that in a second. But master is the name of the branch I'm on. So if I had a different branch, I could call it development. But right now I only have one branch, it's called master. And with one commit, that's the hashtag that identifies it, and that's my message that goes with it. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to say git space push. Notice, by the way, what did I just do to get that? Yeah. Up here it says your branch is up to date with origin master. But that's what I need to do is I need to, I probably did I do this? Hold on just a second. Git remote -v. Yeah. Okay. So we have this idea, we have this notion of a local file system. That's going to be C9. And a remote file system, that's going to be GitHub. And so that's the last thing we need to do is we need to push up to GitHub. And the official command to do that is git push, and you can see that information right here, origin space master, which means I'm going to push to my, I'm going to push my origin local file system from the master branch. But I will tell you that you don't necessarily have to remember that, because right now our repository is very simple. It's not very complex. We only have one branch, we only have one user, we only have one file. You can just type git push. Again, with great responsibility, or with great power comes great responsibility. If you have a lot of branches and a lot of users, you're going to want to be way more precise about what you're pushing. But for us, easiest thing to do, just type git push, hit enter, and it will tell us something like this. What stuff do we really need to know there? It compressed some objects. One of the reasons why Git is so efficient is because it does things with compressed files. It pushed our data up to, you're going to have a different message right there with something similar, github.com, your username / repository name, hello-world.git is the one we're using. Gives us 2 hashtags. So the first commit and the second commit, I'm not sure which order, but we can look that up. And we're just working off the master branch. So that's everything that it's telling us there. What's really, it's kind of a pain, I find, to figure all that out at the command line level. But what's really nice is after you push it up to GitHub, it's way easier to browse GitHub and see how things have changed. So let's go back over to our Hello World repository. Not that one, not that one, that one, the one with one commit, right? And notice this is how we left it. We had one commit, we had one file, we have one branch, but go ahead and hit file refresh right now. And one of the things you should see change is you should now have 2 commits. And now this README file is going to be up to date with the changes you just made. So your local repository and your remote repository are the same. So what I find is that if you really want to look at how those things have changed over time, it's easier to go to GitHub and click on this commits message right here. So I'm going to click on 2 commits so you can see what happened. And it gives me my first 2 commits, my initial commit, my first commit. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. What I'll do is I will make another change to my repository. So I'm going to go back to README, and I'm going to add some more data. Favorite books. You guys can do this with me if you want. Let's say White Fang, Harry Potter, and what else? I don't know. Can't even think of anything that I've read recently. Star Wars is not a book, no. Well, actually, there are books, so yeah, we'll go with Star Wars. It was originally a movie, and I always say that with great feeling because I was 10 years old when the movie came out. There was no book at the time, right? Star Wars. All right. So now I'm going to save this. So now I have this file on my local file system, even though C9 is in the cloud, that's my local, that is out of sync with what's up on GitHub, right? If we take a quick look at GitHub and look at the Hello World, even after we refresh, it's not in sync because I haven't pushed yet, right? So I'm going to go back to C9. I've saved this file. Then I'm going to go back to my terminal. Again, you could be working down here. That's the most convenient place, but so you can see it, I'm working over here. I'm going to type git status, and some of that information, by the way, if you remember, we had opened that, we cloned this Git repository. A lot of those commands are listed right there in the common commands. But I'm going to type git status and just hit enter and just read this because it's going to remind, what it's telling me is I have one file that's changed. I know it's changed because it's in red. Okay. This is a really good place to stop. Like if I went, oh, I didn't mean to change that, it actually gives me a command right here that will undo that file. just file that away. It's good to know. We're not going to do it right now. But I want to save this file. I like it. So I did type git status. Now I'm going to type git add. And I'm going to hit dot because I want all of the files that have changed. But I could take, it would be safer to type git add space readme.md. That's the safest thing to do. You can name each file. Git add dot. Now I just want to, for my own purposes, I just want to confirm that I did really stage it. Once you get used to that, you probably won't. I'll type git status again. And it tells me, I don't know, you guys can't see all that. Let me see if I can get this back up higher. On the branch master, says it's up to date locally. It gives me a command on how I can roll back to unstage what I just staged. I don't want to do right now, but it's reminding me right there what it is. The fact that this file is in red means that it's in the staging area, ready to be committed, ready to be timestamped, right? So I'm going to type git commit. That's the committing, and then you have to do a -m, and then put in a commit message. So I'm going to say added favorite books. And somehow I got my fingers ahead of myself, but I'm pretty certain this will work. You should have your comment within double quotes. And so I'm going to hit enter. And it tells me that one file changed and there were 7 insertions. Okay. So now I'm still out of sync, right? My local file system has not yet been pushed up to GitHub. All I did was I staged it and I committed that to a timestamp. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type git push. And that's confirming there that my push is done. Now, this is where I find it's easier to look at the staging at GitHub. So again, notice this file at GitHub is not officially up to date yet because I haven't refreshed my browser. It still says I only have 2 commits, but if I click refresh, that commit will change to 3, and I'll get more data down here. I don't know if you can see all that. We'll try and make it as visual as possible. So if I refresh my browser, yeah, so it added my favorite books, and it tells me I have 3 commits. And if I want to look at those commits, those are the things I just did, right? I have my init commit, my first commit, and added my favorite books. So these hashtags right here in the middle, those are the way you would reference the different commits. So like I said, we're not necessarily going to roll back, but if you needed to roll back at the command line, this is what identifies one commit from the next. There's a shorthand of that. But I'm just going to tell you, and your mileage may vary here, since I don't really generate a lot of software. I don't find it super useful to pull out the command line to do the rollback. What I tend to do is look at my commit messages and find where the change was that I want to go back to, right? So if I want to go back to the version of my README file before I added new books, I know that it's the one before added favorite books, right? I know that it's this one. And I'm going to go over here. If I hover over that, it says, browse the repository to the point of history, right? That means I'm rolling back in time through GitHub. I'm going to click on that version of that commit, and it's going to show me what the repository looked like at that point in time. So if I want to roll back, I actually want to have this file in this stage. For me, the easiest thing to do is to then click on the README file, click on the raw button, and literally copy and paste that. So I've got that in my buffer. And then I would go back over to C9. and edit my file into that stage. Now, there really is a different way to do it, and I don't know. I would defer to people who get paid to be coders. Do you find that you use git reset more often or often? Do you find it convenient?
Yeah, I mean, if you're so on an individual project, it probably doesn't matter what you're doing, because whatever workflow is the most convenient for you.
Right.
When you're working on a larger team project,
A group project,
it has specific meaning about the way that you do stuff. So Git has different ways to go back to other versions, and so it can be, I talk about a lot of stuff. If you're like testing, when it's something great, you may do a whole bunch of, you can check out the different commits on your system to see like, oh, was it broken here, was it broken here, without having to go through that workflow. But the Git, it's like a Git revert command that can revert an individual commit as well. And that is the workflow, like if we're doing something formal in our project and we need revert, we would use, because by using that command, you've got a very, very high assurance that it did exactly what you wanted it to do, right? We ran this command, it knows this is exactly what I changed, I'll just revert those changes, and other developers don't want to have to look at it very closely. They're like, ah, you did Git revert, it's fine. You know, if you did it by hand, they may want to look at every line to make sure that
they would scratch their head and think that makes sense. I mean, in a group context, that makes a lot of sense.
But on your own project, it really wouldn't matter.
Yeah. What I find difficult about the, not necessarily the revert itself, but well, maybe I shouldn't say what I find difficult. What I find really valuable about having all of my versions visible in GitHub is that it's easier to browse for me, where something went wrong, as opposed to typing git diff at the command line and pulling out those hashtags and all that. I find that not intuitive.
Yeah, I would completely agree. When I'm looking for where something went wrong, I will be using the graphical tool of whatever system we use. Now, sometimes though, it's like, well, we're not sure.
Right.
And that's where you may end up using some tooling to like check out different commits and try and run your code and see if the bug is there.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of a like, well, we don't know what the bug is, but we know what happened in the past week. So let's start checking out commits and figure out where the bug was, and then we can look at that commit in like the web interface to find out what changed and what was broken.
I can imagine that the more people you add into the coding project, the more complex that becomes.
Yeah.
Right. So let's see, where are we? I'm going to go back over here to the first repo that we cloned and just see. So one of the things I pulled out for you in this, and you have a copy of this now in your C9 workspace, is some common Git commands. Most of which we've done, I guess. We've done git status, we've done git add. You can see here that you can you can use command line tools to add different classes of files, like all JavaScript files, star.js. We've done a git commit with a commit message. The git diff is what we were just talking about. Git log, just so you see it. Let me go back over here to the command line. If I type git log here in my Hello World repository, it will show me, this is a text view of the same information that I get over here by clicking on my commits. Hold on, I'm stuck in my older version there. Oh no, I went too far back. Wrong one. You like that? Yeah. I was taking a nap in there's a park in the East River between Manhattan and Brooklyn called Roosevelt Park. Yeah. It's a good place to hang out. Nice place. So, right, these three versions here is the same thing as typing git log and seeing it displayed this way. This is just a different way to look at it. So there's git log, git push origin master, that's what we were covering, and git pull. If I made a change on a different computer and pushed it up to GitHub, or I could actually make a change at GitHub to keep C9 in sync when the repository changes, I need to pull that down, right? So you could do this with me if you'd like. Go to your hello world and find your README file. Click on your README file. And you'll find a little pencil icon where it says edit this file. You could click on that. And now we're in the onboard editor at GitHub. So you can add even more information here. Like say favorite sports. And I see that I misspelled the word favorite over there. So I'm going to add my E, favorite sports. I'm going to add college basketball. Cycling. And track. Okay. When I'm done making that change, I have a different interface for doing the kinds of Git changes that I need. So it gives me an option to put in a Git commit message right here where it says update README file. So this is what you would put inside of the double quotes after the -m. So here I'm just going to write added my favorite sports. And it gives me an option to have a longer commit message that gives me even more information. I'm not going to bother with that. I'm going to make sure that the radio button I've checked is this one right here where it says commit directly to the master branch. When you get into more collaborative operations, that may not be the best option. Then I'm going to click the green button, and that's going to be effectively the same as doing a git push back into GitHub. But now my GitHub is out of sync with my C9. So the trick is I need to pull that down. So if I go back over to C9 in my terminal, this is a pretty easy command. This is just git pull. And you'll see something interesting when you type that. You probably can't see that. Let me move that up a little bit. It will tell you what files changed, how many changes there were. In this case, it calculates that there were 10 changes. And how it calculates that is never really all that important to me, but it shows that there were like 8 positive changes and 2 lines were deleted. That's as far as I'm concerned, that's as much as I need to know. Maybe in a full coding context, you need to know more than that. But that's, in fact, that's a different way of saying it right there. 8 insertions, 2 deletions. That's enough for me. So now my C9 is once again in sync with GitHub. So one of the things that you figured out by now, no doubt, is that how many folks here have used what's it called? Box or Dropbox or OneFile. So those are like, remember earlier I said that Git is like a bulletproof worldwide collaborative tool. Those tools are less bulletproof, but they're sort of a kind of a version control. So if you make a change, it's supposed to synchronize somewhere. And the thing is, you don't have to think about the synchronizing. It's always supposed to happen in the background without you doing anything. Whereas Git requires you to think. Git push, git pull. Like anytime you sit down, you probably want to do a git pull first thing to make sure you have the latest version. And when you stop, the last thing you want to do is git push. Because you just want to be very intentional about making those synchronizations happen. And that's not really that complicated. Once you get used to doing it, it becomes second nature. All right, so it's 8:30. And my question is, we take a break or should we work on Git branching? Keep it moving. I like it. All right. So let's see. You should still have two versions of C9 open. And if you go to the cloned version of the first repository that we brought down, you could open up this file right here called O2 branch MD. And I'm just going to right click on that and click preview so I can see that file. All right, so my context of branching is maybe a little bit different from a full-fledged coding situation. Like what I do is I make a lot of educational materials and I get them set just right, and I'll usually use them for a semester, but then I'll usually by the end of the semester want to update it completely. But I don't like to mess with what's already working. So that's when I usually branch something, right? So I have something working for the fall of 2018, but I know that through December, I'm going to work on fixing it for the spring of 2019. So at that point, I'll create a branch called Spring 2019. And I know that at any point in time, people are looking at my old code. It's just fine. It's working. I share a lot of my materials. People borrow them from all over the place. I know that everything that they're doing there is good. Meanwhile, I'm experimenting over in this other space. Now, from my point of view, and then so I'm experimenting. Let's say I was fully successful. I can then, when I'm done, go back to the main branch, the production branch, and merge all of that new stuff back in. It's just one command.
Visual representation of branching and like how.
I don't have one with me, but I bet we could. They might Git branch. Typically, when I teach this, I use RStudio as the Git client, and the branching is displayed in the Git client. But we're not using that client. And I know that Git Kraken and some of the other clients are really good at that. But the command line I find it to be kind of confusing. But you know what? I do have a visual representation that I can show you. Git. Did we have one of Google Images? Git branch. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So, in fact, that's Bitbucket's training material. The problem with that image is it shows that branches were created, but it doesn't show any merges. There's a good one. This is a pretty good example. So in that example I was talking about, like here's my fall 2018. Here's my branch where I go spring 2019. I might continue to make changes to fall 2019 that are not really relevant to this. And I might make changes to this. And there's a merge, where it brings all of these changes back, and assuming there are no conflicts, it's going to be a completely seamless merge. If there are conflicts, I have some work to do, but it'll tell me there are conflicts, and I just have to look at it. Again, in the group context, it's more complicated, right? But, so from, yeah, please do.
You guys are working on a JavaScript project with other people. You know, this is the blue line or just the master conversion. And then one of your colleagues says like, hey, like, individuals you can add input fields part of the website. Why don't you go create your own branch off, and then add that input field. And once you do that, send me a pull request, and then I can merge that into the that's what that green line is like a small change that someone is asking you to make. You make a change in your own little work and your code, and once you're done, then push that send a request and pull back into
production and development. And you can have multiple branches. You can have a lot of development. But you have to have somebody who monitors the merging.
But I think generally, as you guys are starting out, you probably will be working more on the green but won't definitely maintain the version of code. You'll be adding smaller changes, and then you can pull requests with those changes. And the supervisor will probably. Right, so you can see how this can become really complicated. You can have like a print design above the design. And ideally, even if you're working on something separate from you, is that you're not really touching code, but the supervisor is trying to merge everything back together. You may change some pieces, and it should be fairly seamless, but of course, we'll never work with that. So, you might have to like make some kind of sign. It all kind of depends, but hopefully you don't have to worry too much about that.
So you ready to branch? Okay. So over here where it says, over here in the originally cloned repository, there's a series of commands. I haven't given you all of the specific commands because at this point, the commit, the push, all of those, I think you'll know how to do. But the branch commands I've written out. And the idea is treat your existing repository right now as you're making a development change. So you're going to create a branch called development, or you can call it whatever you want. You can call it nifty idea. I don't care what you call it. So you're going to create that branch. You're going to check that branch out. You're going to make changes on that branch. And you're going to commit those changes into the staging area. And then I want you to check out the production branch, the first branch, which is called master. And notice that those two files are no longer in sync, but they're all sitting on your local file system. We haven't done anything with GitHub at this point. I just want you to kind of feel your way around and see how you can do this at the command line, okay? If you'd like, I'll do it with you. Yep, okay. All right. I'm good with narrating. All right, so let's go back. I'm going back over here to my hello world. Here's what I want you to do. First thing, we're going to type git branch, because I want to see what branches I have. And that's way down there. By the way, does anybody know how to make my terminal font larger? Yeah, I don't know if that's going to work here. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So there we are.
I think it might be view. Go down to font size. Oh yeah, that's right. It doesn't let that work inside the terminal.
Right. Okay.
I forgot.
All right. We're all right. So if you just type git branch right now, it's going to tell you how many branches you have. All right. We just have one. It's called master. I want to create one. So I have to remind myself of the command git branch space branch name. Git branch space. I'm going to call it development. I'm going to call it dev because I like to not type too much. And now if I type git branch again, it's telling me I have two branches. I'm on this one. The one that's in green that has the asterisk by it, that's the branch that I'm in. The other one listed there, right? So I want to get into that other one.